Excellent. Hello, welcome to the Land Down Under Hangout. We are a media consuming club, consummation club. We consume all kinds of media, books, graphic novels, TV shows, and then we get together and talk about them. Today we are talking about Gabrielle Zevin's Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I listened on audiobook, so I do not have a physical copy. I think it was quite difficult to get, so I think a few people read it either audio style or Kindle or Kobo or ebook. That's the word I was looking for. So I don't think we have a physical copy to hold up today.
I read a physical one, but I had to return it.
Well, one person got it from the library.
Very popular from the library. Very popular.
Very popular. I think this comes down to something I'll get into. So I'm going to change things a little bit, and I'm going to go as I chose this month's book. My pick was this month. I wanted to give a little bit of context why and what my opinions and first impressions were, and then we'll go around the houses. So that when I finished it, I didn't know what I really thought. I actually sort of sat with it and like, did I enjoy this? Am I glad I read this? And I'm really not sure, and I'm still not really sure. I think though, what I can say is that if I wasn't doing this for book club, and I think this is probably a case for some of the people who have joined us today. Hi, Lisa, welcome. Is that if I wasn't doing it for the club, I probably would have said, oh, I'll get back to it later, and then accidentally DNF'd it. And it wasn't because it was terrible or anything like that. It just, I don't know, there was some things, and we'll get into it in a second. The other thing I wanted to speak to is why I was so wanting to read this, and possibly why this is all checked out from the library. Is the reason I wanted to read this or was even aware of it was because John Green recommended it. John Green loves this book, and I understand why he loves this book, and we can talk a bit about that. But that, I guess, has being able to relate to the characters and the setup of this novel is not necessarily my experience, which is also kind of one of the themes of the book. So that's kind of where I've come out. Let's go around the houses. I'm going to start with Mel. Well, good people who've finished the book. Mel, I think, I don't know, you might not have. You might have.
I sit into the category of technically, but kind of not as well. I skimmed it to get to the end because I just...
Fair enough.
Similar experience. I would have probably, if it hadn't been for book club, I would have just put the thing down and probably not bothered. Yeah, I was also working against the due date from the library. I'd let it go all the way till the end, and I decided to pick it up just to give it a go. And before the day before it was due back. And so I was sort of working against that, and in the end just was like, yeah, you know what, I definitely don't want to buy it, so I'm just going to skim through and get to finish it all off and get it back to the library, sort of thing. So yeah, we know from previous discussions, I engage with character mostly when I'm reading stories, and this was not a story that would engage me in character that way. I was not particularly a fan of the characters. It wasn't to say they were bad people per se or anything on those lines. It's just I just didn't care about them much, and yeah, so it just didn't engage me very well. I skimmed through to the end, so I know sort of what happens, but and mostly I do that kind of thing when I'm skimming because I'm trying to find something to make me want to read the rest of the story, to go back and read it in detail, and I didn't find a single thing. In fact, probably the reverse. So that was me.
Cool. Elizabeth, I'm just moving around my houses.
Yeah, no worries. So I have not finished. I've read 40% through. I found it well written and interesting, but I am not enjoying it. So yeah, a bunch of thoughts, but we'll dig into it, I'm sure.
Yeah, great. Lisa.
Yeah, I was listening to the audiobook, and I was doing that. I was going for my walks. And the last 2 weeks, I haven't really had any walks. because it's been marking time. So I haven't finished it, but I will actually agree. I was having a little trouble fully engaging with it as well. Like a couple of the other ones that we're reading, I'm really like invested in, and this one is just not holding my attention. I would possibly consider not finishing it either. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
It doesn't sound like you're going to get a lot of reason tonight at this rate.
Yeah. Kim, with your 17%.
Yes, so I didn't hate it. I just pretty much the same as everybody else. I just wasn't engaging with it. It wasn't piquing my interest. It wasn't badly written. I didn't dislike the characters. It just wasn't interesting enough to me to keep picking it back up. And yeah, I just sort of gave up because I just wasn't interested.
Yeah. And Nye, did you do anything at all? I know you've had a very full-on time with.
So I've got, I think, 6 hours left in the audiobook.
Oh, well done.
So I've read like 2/3
Yeah.
ish of it. And that's only because I've just had it playing while I was laying on the couch. I heard it, but it, like everyone else, I was not super engaged with it. Like, it's not that it's poorly written, because it is very well written, but I'm just not interested in their story. It's not giving me anything interesting that I care about. Like, there's not any point that I'm like, oh, that's a thing that I'm interested in. I want to know more about this character. Like, they're just two people living two lives, and while that can sometimes be interesting, there's no real like thing to make it a story other than just two people living their lives with like their people around them. And I don't know if that changes towards the end of the book or whatever, but like everyone else said, I'm only going to finish this because I'm so far through now that I want it to count for my book count. But like,
Count it anyway. Yeah.
but like,
Yeah.
if we weren't reading this for book club, I probably wouldn't have picked it up.
Cool. So I had 3 areas that I was going to talk to, and some of it we can talk more. And I was expecting more people to finish, but hey, we can dig into it. So I had premise and themes, character design, and structure. Now, structure is going to be really hard because nobody has really. I think maybe Mel might have picked up on the NPC part and the part in the in-game part. Sorry, Elizabeth, remind me how far you got into it. Was it 40%?
I'm at 40%, yeah.
40%.
So they've just moved to California.
Right. And Lisa, you were 40% as well?
Yeah, I think that's about right. That's
Cool.
or maybe
Okay.
30, like a little bit before then. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some of the structure stuff, which I thought would be, maybe you can talk a little bit more with Naomi and Mel about, because there was some structural stuff that I thought was interesting, but also there was just almost too many ideas. I can't really get into, but as far as what I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about was maybe starting with why I chose this. And as I said, like I'm a big fan of John Green's work. I find especially his nonfiction work, Anthropocene Reviewed. I've enjoyed his essays for years, especially when he talks about thoughts from places and that type of thing. And he raved about this book. And so I was like, look, and I read the premise of this book, which is friends, 3 friends set up a video game development company. And I'm essentially the same age as these people. I went to university at the same time they went to university. So I was like, okay, there's a lot of like stuff I can relate to. I play video games, but I also know what goes into the development of it. So when they talk about a game engine and developing it, I have enough nous to know what that means. And I but it was really interesting. I think that's sometimes the problem with recommendations. And I know the club, we've talked a lot about this. And I think certainly when we talk about our rating system, because, you can, it's one of those things of, oh, I have to tell everybody about this book. And then there's others where you go, look, I enjoyed it, but am I going to recommend it to people? Or is it a case of, I would recommend this to people who I think are going to resonate with this book? And that's the bit that I think that, I don't know how you all felt, but I came away from reading this going, okay, John, I know why you liked this, but I think you haven't really understood that this isn't going to, like, you are somebody who's an entrepreneur and set up a business with, a friend, your brother, and that has developed and grown, and you wrote a novel that went freaking viral and you attracted all this fame and attention, as did Mark. So there's so many of this that resonates with you, but to the ordinary pleb, maybe not so much. So, and I love, look, one of my favorite 80s movies is Ghostbusters, which is a going into business story. So I'm all up for a going into business story, but this was just a little bit tough to kind of to dig into. So I wondered if others had, and I wanted to ask others, and maybe those who are more closer to the literary circles, like this was, like you said, there's huge wait lists on this at the library and stuff. Is anyone know? Is it just everyone's big Vog Brothers fans, or is it just that there's some other reviews out there that I haven't really, I'm not understanding or resonating with? And
so, I think I mentioned this to Mel and Elizabeth during morning tea, that this book's been all over Book Talk, with people saying how fabulous it is, but no one really saying what it's about. So that's probably why, or some of the reason why the wait is so long, because it's been all over Book Talk. Everyone's been saying that it's so great and this book is so good, everyone should read it, blah, 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 but no one's really been explaining what the book's about. And a lot of these book talkers that are people that I generally follow mostly read sci-fi and fantasy and, some contemporary romance, but generally their contemporary romance is more on the smutty side of romance, not the contemporary side.
That's okay. We're here for that.
But it's not, this type of book isn't generally what they recommend, which is why I was sort of so surprised that people that usually recommend me like high fantasy, strong sci-fi, romance style books recommended this book without giving any sort of preface of this is what it's about, or this is what you're sort of looking at this book. Because, generally people have genres that they're more into than others. And I'm not saying that if you like sci-fi fantasy that you wouldn't enjoy this book, but being recommended this book by people who usually recommend those types of books and not having any expectation of it being a contemporary book kind of put me off as well. Like when I first started listening to it, I kept waiting for the sci-fi of it. Like I kept waiting for aliens or AI or something to happen to give me something, and I was like, no, this is just a story about two kids who grew up together, and it's a good story, but it's just not what I was expecting.
See, I didn't really, I knew it wasn't sci-fi fantasy. I knew that before I went in. And I liked the premise. As I read it, and I read the premise and I was like, this sounds interesting. And I had no problems and expected it not to be anything except for the gaming element to be something that I was directly related to. I was pleasantly surprised that I was close to the same age as what they were. So there were things that, especially in the early parts of the book, that were pinging with me. And I was going, oh yeah, magic eyes and that sort of stuff. And I was like, yeah, this is cool. I know this stuff. And, but I still couldn't find anything that made me want to be reading this book. I can see that, what you're saying about the structure, Sarah, that was intelligent, but that didn't make it enjoyable.
Yeah.
Can I ask, for anyone who's read it a bit more, I felt disappointed by the gaming aspect of the story. I was I was nodding my head before, because it's like I was also kept waiting for, and it wasn't necessarily aliens or anything, but I was sort of waiting for there to be a more in-depth secondary story about the game, like as in you'd get into the story of the game, almost like a secondary story.
That
like
that happens later. Yeah, that happens later
Yeah.
within the structure, and that's where the structure, I think the author had lots of really interesting ideas and was trying things new. And why not try some stuff out, right? And there's still a couple of parts later on in the novel. There's one where it's written from Marx's, well, his perspective, but as the NPC, as the non-playable character. And that's actually quite a powerful scene. But then there's a whole section in Mel where you basically are in game. But it's really weird because nothing else, it hasn't been this. That was the part of the structure I found kind of like it was quite jarring, where you basically, and whereas I think to your point, Lisa, like if there'd been a bit more back and forth out of like through the different games, that would have been quite cool, or playing it a bit more. I think that's a really valid point.
I think, sorry.
I was just going to say, I'm at 40%, and like none of that has kicked in yet, and that's really late.
Yeah,
there's actually
the game structure bit is basically in the last 20, I would say.
If you want a book that does do that and does it well, The Three Body Problem does it really, really well.
Okay.
It's obviously a sci-fi, but it does move between the gaming element and the real world element in very interesting ways. And I quite enjoyed that. And that's what I was looking for with this. Like I was,
yeah.
But I do think it was clever what she was trying. She was trying something.
Yeah.
I just didn't think it worked for me anyway.
Yeah.
Clearly it worked for John Green and a lot of TikTokers.
As Sarah was saying, I understand why John Green liked this book, but it's not why I would like this book. And do you know the other person who recommended it on the cover was Erin Morgenstern?
Oh, that's right, it was too.
Oh, yes. And we like, it's really weird because I think of the Night Circus. I know it's kind of fantasy, but I also don't think of it as fantasy. I think of it as more of a contemporary fiction. I don't know why, I just do.
I think Erin Morgenstern is actually a really good, like a really good comp in that sense. Like it's not because that this is fantasy like The Night Circus is fantasy, or even like what was the other one?
Oh God, my brain.
Yeah, it should be on my shelf. I just can't see it. But you
I'm
guys
just glad that you couldn't just pull it from your head like normal, Elizabeth. That makes me happy.
I should, because I really liked it. I liked it a lot. G and I were on the same page on that one. Oh, there it is, The Starless Sea.
Oh, that one.
Yep.
See, I feel like this one had more in common with The Starless Sea than The Night Circus.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
especially
I think,
in terms of character design.
Yeah, and that actually also had a video game element too, now that I think about it. The main character was a video game student. But to go, let me back up a bit and ask Sarah, you said that like the gaming element of the narrative kind of kicks in at the last 20%, which is very late. But do you think that there was a compelling like reason to leave it that late? Like,
yes, because, and I'm going to spoil, apologies, because what happens to the friendship is it breaks apart because I'm just going to have to say it. Sorry, Marx dies. And that destroys the friendship.
I assume something about that because of the way when it sort of turns to her being in an interview, things she said, I understood that something must have happened to Mark, because Mark's not part of the interview thing.
And that's why he has a section, which is fantastic. His section is the NPC. Is great, and it's so that is very compelling. It's very emotional. It's also because Marx is, I identified as a producer. I really identified with Marx, but Marx was also way too perfect, which is why he was the NPC. He was too perfect. Like, I'm like going, producers are not, they are also creative. They have opinions. Like, we can't, you know, we just happen to be really good at organizing. It doesn't mean we don't also want to make things and be involved. So he was just this perfect producer, which is why I really enjoyed this whole thing of he's the NPC. We see it from his point of view, which is basically his death, is his accident and his death. But that what happens is that Sadie and Marx are a couple, and that just destroys her emotionally, understandably. Sam has never been, as we read, very good at expressing or understanding emotions. So what happens is they end up finding one another within a game. And what you're doing is you're playing as those two characters. And it's really interesting, but it is also kind of jarring because you leave this whole section with a lot of questions, and it's the time that you really want to be these characters who, quite frankly, aren't particularly compelling. You don't really care about them. They're not, well, I can't say not everybody, but I think, Mel, you sort of summed it up that it was like, they're not bad people, but it's just really hard to give a crap about them.
Yes,
you know,
exactly that.
Yeah, and I think I said here in character design, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. You know, we all know these people. We all know a Sam or a Marx, and Sam or Sadie or Marx to a certain point. But I said here, did I empathize with them? Sure, but did I like any of them? Not really. You know, that's part of it. I don't want to hang out like with Sam or with Sadie, and it's that classic thing that Kirsten always talks about when you want to smack characters around the head and say, for God's sake, just talk to one another. Like, it was like that.
It was so that.
Yeah.
It was so that. I actually liked Sam at the beginning. Like, the first bit with Sam, I was like, oh yeah, I'm liking it. And Sadie bits came in and I was like, oh, I'm not really enjoying this, and then went back to Sam and I was like, oh God, okay, no, I don't like him either. Oh God.
Yeah. And then that's the reason, from a structural point of view, when you actually suddenly going, okay, these people have gone through a tremendous loss. Now is the time I want to be in their heads, and you're suddenly in their characters' heads. It was really interesting, and I, full credit to the author, but it was also just this missed opportunity. Whereas if you'd set that up all the way along, that could have been really interesting as kind of like a play on words or a double entendre as you went through it. But it just kind of was like, okay, now I want to, okay, why am I in this world that you haven't set up? So it was a little bit like that for me. I don't know about for you, Mel, but
no,
yeah.
There's a bit where I just got to where it suddenly switches to, I think it's Sadie being interviewed and talking about things in the past tense, and it's that I found incredibly jarring. Like, actually rewound and went, did I accidentally jump a chapter or two? Like, it was just so like, jarring is the word, because it was like, hang on, wait a minute, we've been following them in there, feels like real time, and suddenly we've jumped to some future time. That
I did wonder whether this
it didn't resolve into anything either by the end of it. Like, if you have those interviews, you're often like, a friend of mine's just watched Daisy Jones and the Six, and that's all told through interview and flashback, but it's this back and forth, and it's kind of like, what was that? What purpose was it serving? There was some of those kind of things. Sorry, Elizabeth, I could see you had.
I was just gonna say though that, like, I can understand where you're coming from there, but like, it sets up from the very first sentence that this is not like a linear narrative like that, because it talks about Sam Masseur, who is Sam before he was Masseur, as like his big public identity, and like, it talks about him like that. So you get, like, from that very first sentence, you know that this is not a present tense narrative, if that makes sense. And I feel like, because I had a real sense of, like, it had a feeling of like tragedy to me, like in the Greek sense of tragedy. So like this big epic story that is kind of inevitable and is always going to end up this way, if that makes sense.
It does.
A strong sense of that, and I think that was part of it, and like the interviews and some of the language choice there.
Yeah.
In fact, it reminded me a little bit of like some of the C dramas and K dramas in that sense, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I completely missed that, and now that you're saying it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, it did.
I mean, it's easy to overlook something like that because it is the very first sentence, and it takes you some time to kind of like get into the flow of things. It's really easy to overlook.
I actually was wondering, I mean, I was reading the physical version of it. I was thinking, I don't think I could have handled this book in audio.
I'm going to say it has that classic problem that you and I hate. He said, she said, he said, and it drove me up the wall. I don't know if it was a stylistic choice, but like there are as we know, there are lots of ways to intonate when someone is saying something.
Yes.
And I don't know if the author was purposefully doing this as a stylistic choice. Because if they, I don't know.
I don't know
if people just aren't used to audiobooks.
An issue in that it's an easy. They haven't thought about how it sounds, basically.
Yes, because you can see the difference that happened with John Scalzi after Red Shirts, that he changed the way that he did that sort of thing, because of the fact that, in particular, Red Shirts did very, very badly with that particular problem in the audio one, and he changed it. So I think you're right. It is a she, yes.
Yeah, I'm guessing.
Gabrielle Zevin.
Gabrielle.
With an A-L-L-E.
Yeah. That she didn't, I don't know if she's just not got enough experience with writing for an audiobook as well as a physical book, or what happened there, but it definitely is something that I think a lot of authors need to learn at some point.
Yeah, because in print, like he said, she said, isn't visible. You do not pay attention.
I didn't notice it.
I
did not notice it. It's not what I was thinking of when I said I didn't think I could do this in audiobook.
Yeah, and I wrote here, there's a lot of he said, she said in the audiobook format, and it's almost unbearable. Not sure if authors are aware of it. Thank you, Elizabeth. Or if it's a stylistic choice. It makes me much more aware as a writer that you can pack so much more nuance and emotion into the attribution of each spoken sentence. He quavered, she countered, he retorted, they surmised.
Because you see, that's the problem.
I don't know. It just makes me aware.
If you do that in print, it is awful. Because every little bit is like some detail, and you're like, oh my god, seriously, can you just say it straight?
Which is what John Scalzi changed to. He stopped putting the names of people next to it. Like he would just have the conversation.
No, not like that, but sometimes you just need a plain she said.
Yeah.
Like,
I know that, but I'm just saying that like he changed it so that he would set up the back and forth of the conversation, and so instead of having to say again and again and again who was saying it or what, he would just let the conversation flow on the written form, which translated much better than into audio. Sorry, I know I'm using it as a strong example, but it is where I originally was like, about this.
And what I'm saying, Elizabeth, is I'm not saying that everything should be done that way, but it's a case of there are lots of words and is that awareness that you can use something to help support it. You don't have to do it all the time, but yeah, classic case in point. I'm currently listening to Little Women, and it's fantastic, an audiobook. It's fantastic. And well, I don't know. I borrowed it from the library. But I'm just saying from the written, listening to it being read I'm not having that problem. And this was written a long time ago.
Yes, but it was also probably a time where people read aloud to each other a lot more than they currently
so
do.
we had a lack. So there's been interesting.
That is a very good point.
A renaissance that type of thing then.
Oh,
yeah,
G's,
that's a really good
leading
point.
the charge. She's doing it with Luke all the time right now, especially like Kushiel's
Stat.
yeah, that and all of that
Gary.
series. It's like,
Yeah,
go girl.
yeah. Anyway, that was the thing. But you,
There's a balance.
Lisa, you did the audiobook as well, and I know Nate's headed off, but I'd like to know what you thought, Lisa, because I didn't think the narrator was up to scratch.
That could be part of why I'm had trouble engaging with it. I think if I'd read it, I probably as a physical book or an ebook, I might have found it a little easier to engage. I feel like when you read it yourself, you control your pace of reading a bit. When you're audio booking it, you haven't really got that control. You just unless you're one of those people who listens to it at double pace or something, but I'm not one of those people. And not to criticize that, but it's like I just didn't think to do, I didn't do that. So actually I might have found it a bit easier to engage. And probably also with the ebook, I could, when there is a jarring moment with an ebook or a physical book, I would like flip back and go, oh, and I might go back to the front page and notice what Elizabeth pointed out. Okay. Which I actually sometimes don't mind doing that with a physical book, whereas with an audio book, it's just annoying.
Yes. Even with
I've done that with
tricky.
Even ebooks are a little bit. Paper books are really good for that flipping, which is why if I have a reference book, I always like a paper form because I like to flip, and ebooks you can't do that with very well.
And that description, Lisa, is exactly why I was thinking I don't think I could do this in audiobook, because I was doing that so much in this book that both backwards and forwards, because sometimes I'd be just like, move on.
Yeah. They're very dry characters, and the delivery was very deadpan as well. And that's a directorial choice. But it did mean that things like the he said, she said sticks out even more when you don't have color and texture within the voice to even determine the different characters. I found it a little tough. I kind of got past it, but it was a little bit tough.
Single narrator?
Sorry?
Single narrator?
Oh no, the NPC I think was the only one that the NPC they gave NPC section, they gave another narrator for it.
Wow. Okay.
But there was also we could talk character design in a minute, but the one she gave Dove an Israeli accent, so that was helpful. But I mean, I was hating that guy anyway. He was clearly set up. He was clearly set up as an antagonist, but it was there was some that one I actually think she was probably given the best direction on, but I found that the rest of it, and it's hard. It's maybe, like you said, it's just the way it's been written and explored.
I richly, because I have a section in my book for doing the characters, I've literally written next to him douchebag coder.
I love it. What did I write? Well, let's move on to the characters then. And anything we want to talk about there.
Skeezy Professor was mine.
Yeah.
That works too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just like, it felt real skeevy that this like a grown adult man was like, who's married with a wife in another country. It's like, yes, let me groom you, 19-year-old girl.
While you do all of this work for me for free, while you're doing all of your studies, and
yeah. I instinctively have picked up that you are from a what do we call it, love languages, that you need praise, so you'll seek that out from me, and I can use that to my advantage. But
the thing that annoyed me the most, like all of that was terrible, but the thing that annoyed me the most was how absolutely rude he was about games and his opinion on them and everything. Like the judgments and everything in those early stages where he was just like, sucks, everything sucks. And I'm just like, you know what? You're supposed to be teaching.
You obviously
Yeah.
haven't been to like a university that involves any kind of creativity field.
Perhaps this is true.
I feel
Yeah.
like he was doing the, oh, everyone's going to worship me and think I'm more cool if I'm an asshole about anything, any creative process anyone presents me with. And, you know, except the person I'm shagging. And I'm just like, or want to shag. And I'm like, no, grow up. Seriously. Like,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
And I think I agree with the whole, I just sometimes wanted to beat Sadie over the head. Like, you know, come on already. Like, seriously, how old are you? You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when he went off to, you know, the other country for the wife, I'm like, oh, here we go. And then he comes back and I'm like, yeah, oh, thank God this is over.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was a scene where he's in the car and he's telling her all the things that suck in audiobook format that went on and on and on. And I was just like, okay, like, just, you know, I presume that was a really good one to skim.
Oh, I skimmed a lot of those sections.
Oh, man.
He's back.
Yeah. I want to say, yeah. That was
Yeah,
so
sorry, Kim,
interesting.
he comes back.
Oh, damn it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he comes back a lot. Every time he came back, I was like, more of
Take
him.
that guy.
Yeah. If it's any consolation, in the last 5%, she has lunch with him. And there is like, she has gone through it and she's come out the other side and gone, I don't like, I don't know, he's pulling his same old bullshit and she just sees straight through it now because she's like in her, 30s and she's just like, and she calls him on it. And he realizes he just doesn't have that power over anymore. So which, from a character arc is about the only one I sort of was like, okay, cool. But do we have to put up with him for the rest of it?
My problem with that was that I was like, could it not have been sooner?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, like, because I feel like, sorry, at the point that where I am at, because obviously they've just moved to California, so she's left him behind. And at that point, like, she is starting to, like, she's not there yet.
To be fair, there's progression. I'm not saying there's not progression and all of that.
Yeah.
I was so frustrated from the very beginning from all of it.
Yeah.
That it was just a really long time to get there. And so I was just...
Yeah. No, it was frustrating too, because maybe like we're older as we're reading this, had more life experience and that sort of thing. And also like the writing about Sadie's experience at MIT and in the games industry was very, on point, I thought. As a woman in a male-dominated industry, I found that valuable, I guess, that part of the narrative.
I found it accurate and not enjoyable to read.
Also that, yes.
Yeah. And like the changing of Ichigo to be male and all of this, and the constant, like, it's that duality, which, I get this duality of character where she's like, she doesn't want it, like, oh, but you don't want the limelight, but that doesn't mean she doesn't, like, she wants to give away, to say, like, how am I saying this? Like, just because you don't want the limelight doesn't mean that you don't want the attribution of doing the hard work and working on it. And that's the thing that you could see was just misunderstood. So I yeah. And so it was, I identify with her a lot because I know there's a lot of us here who went through that ourselves in that late 90s, early turn of the century. And I was just like, oh God, this just, I think again, like maybe Mel, this was it. It's just like,
I'm I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah, someone's visiting, and yes,
um,
that's right in front of my face. Thank you.
Maybe like you said, it's like this sort of traumatic reminder of what it was like to be 19 and 20. And we're like, we did that. We don't need to be like,
Yeah.
maybe younger readers, because I listened to this really interesting episode of Imaginary Worlds, and they were talking about there's this whole lot of young people today. I sound very old. Young people today, and they're making like lots of really interesting I guess YouTube videos or exploring different types of ways of making media, and a lot of it's based in like that, like before we went digital, and it's around, which is what the story is so interesting. And they said someone had commented that there's a lot of stories that are based around inflection points in technology or inflection points in historical events, and this has definitely got that to it. So I thought like that because this is about people transitioning, right? They're growing up and they're transitioning, and it's also about the industry transitioning and media transitioning. And I can't remember where I was going with the beginning of it, but that was basically what I also thought was interesting, is that I think that Zevin's exploring a really interesting time and doing it over a 20-year period is really interesting. There's something there. The execution didn't quite work for me.
I had a question for you, Sarah, because like there's some, I think there's a tension the whole way along about like artistic sensibility and making money. And I was wondering, like, because that comes out really clearly when they've made their first game and they're trying to decide who to sell it to. And I was wondering if that plays out further throughout the story.
From the themes that I commented on, I didn't actually note that. So there you go. There's another theme I could have captured. I think I did have this. There's a theme of perspective of being in your own narrative. And I think that comes out. Have you guys hit the both sides part where they're writing, they're creating the game for both sides, but they're
just about to start for me.
Yeah,
I
so
think
that's
Sam was just about to have his operation.
Yeah, so that's basically, it's very on the nose, but in a good way, where they're basically going, we're doing a game where you experience the same story, but from two different narratives, and you can play it either. And both of them take one side to develop and then make up their own narratives about each other. And so from an artistic versus money point of view, that then exacerbates as the part that Sam Mazer works on becomes the preferred part. So in Sadie's mind, she becomes kind of like, I artistically didn't do as well, and I need to do, like, so it becomes that kind of push and pull for herself. So yeah, it comes up a bit more. I'm trying to think if there's other, but I think
it came up for it tied into what you were saying earlier, and now that point has completely escaped me.
She has a go at him.
Oh, that's it.
About it. Yeah. Sorry.
No, it was about, it's gone again.
Oh
no. About not wanting to be in the limelight, but also wanting like your work acknowledged.
Yes.
And I feel like because it ties into that quite closely, but without being exactly the same thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the larger theme, which is there's a duality of perspective. There's two things can be true at the same time. And again, I know that's why John really gravitated to this, but I think there's I don't think it came across as well as it, or maybe we just didn't feel it as much with the characters about that, but it's definitely one of the broader that, yeah, I think there's a really broad theme of two things can be true at once, which is I don't want the limelight, but I want my work acknowledged. I want money, but I want to do something that's really artistic, you know. Yeah, there's definitely in there.
Because I was just thinking, because that idea of like art versus capital is not always a very nuanced one. And I guess I was kind of wondering whether it gains any nuance here.
There is. Marx brings on, I don't know if this is, Mel, let me know if you think I'm off, if I'm not making any sense, but they bring on, what's his name? Ant and his partner to make the high school vampire game, which is incredibly successful for them. How did you describe it, Elizabeth? The whole
art versus capital?
Yeah, whereas they're just they want to make things that people enjoy rather than necessarily make a statement. So they're up to like making 7 or 8, but they love the storytelling. I think it's very much like some of those JP, you know, like, help me out, Mel, the JRPGs, you know, like Zero Time Dilemmas and those type of things. Yeah,
like Final Fantasy style,
with less fighting.
Got it.
Yeah, so more you're making choices, visual novel, but probably with mini games and really great cutscenes and big mysteries, or
it's usually like a choice sort of option, and you choose, and that sort of directs the story, and that it's kind of an old school way of doing things, really. Yeah,
but they're still super popular, you know, like people really enjoy them, and they're really fun to watch streamers play. That's what they're looking for, and I think that's what's interesting, what you were picking up on before, Elizabeth, about wanting merit. I think that really does play into Sadie being male in a male-dominated world, because they don't have to worry as much about getting the recognition for their work, whereas everyone thinks that Ichigo is Sam's. They believe it was Sam, and Sam was this and that. It was all his brainchild, and they never remember her. But it does kind of come into a nice full resolution when Sadie goes to teach at MIT. So she ends up teaching at MIT at the end, so everything comes full circle. And she's got, you know, a nice class of half and half of people who identify as male and people who identify as female. And one of the female students comes up and just basically says, you know, you're a legend, and you know, I came here because of you. Like, so in a way, Sadie then realizes she was seen, which is really nice. And it's like to say, you know, whilst the industry didn't necessarily see you, you did have an impact. You did make a difference, which is kind of nice. The resolution with Sam, do you remember that bit? I didn't really like that scene. I didn't enjoy it that much. I thought it was really, I was like, that's why I finished the book and went, eh.
That's one of the major reasons why I didn't go back and read a whole lot more in detail, because I got to that bit and I was like skimming, and I was just like, okay, well.
Yeah, it was just really weird. So yeah. I don't think there's much more to talk about.
I think in the end, I question if a lot of these people who have recommended this book have actually read it or liked it as much as they thought they think they do. I don't know. Like the number of recommendations that, like, I have seen it so much on Instagram. I'm not on TikTok, so I haven't seen it there, but I know that that's usually feeding into the Instagram thing. I just don't feel like it's warranted for the same degree. I'm not saying there can't be people who didn't enjoy it. Totally think people will have enjoyed it. I just don't think it's to the degree that I'm seeing the number of representation. And it makes me wonder, like, do people read it the way I did and then just went, well, I feel like I should recommend it?
like I understood, like I enjoyed The Fault in Our Stars. Is it the most amazing book that, you know, ever? But I knew it was YA. I knew it's got a, you know, classic structure to it, all this type of stuff. But I completely understood why people loved that book, gravitated to that book. Like it wasn't something I have to reread it, but I could see why. I understood why, and I got it. Like I completely understood what it was, and it was something I was talking about, or I realized why I brought it up. So I talked about that imaginary worlds and talking about, I guess, millennials or whoever the new generation are, and they're fascinated with that transition time. And I wonder if that's also what it is for us, because we went through it, so we don't like, maybe this is so interesting to people who are a lot younger than us, because they're going, oh, this is such an interesting pivotal time, and here's what happened to people over a 20-year period, because they didn't live it, whereas we all have. And I wonder if that's, I'm not fascinated with VHS, but God damn it, there's a heap of 19-year-olds making a whole lot of stuff about, you know, about the time of VHS. You know,
I actually
like,
think that's
great. It wasn't that interesting.
That's one of the reasons why I think I actually got super frustrated with Sadie, is because I was like wanting more from her in terms of, you know, standing up and being a female representing and stuff like that. And I recognize that the story doesn't have to be that, and she was dealing with what she was dealing with and doing the best she could under the circumstances. But my innate feeling, looking back as being the person looking back at that certain time, is I'm wanting a bit more. And maybe that's just coming from somebody who lived through it, rather than someone who's looking back and going, well, she's doing the best she can with what she's got.
I did get some nostalgia out of some of the video games that were discussed, like Dove and Sadie play Metal Gear Solid. And I'm like, yes, there's some of the things that Sadie had to say about it. I'm like, you were right on.
And unfortunately continue to be right on.
And unfortunately continue to be right on, because Kojima is still making games.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, actually, I did have a question I wanted to raise. Sadie's first, well, not her first game, but the game that first got her, like the Nazi game.
Solution.
Thank you. I couldn't remember. I didn't write it down, and I don't have the book. That game, there was a student who wrote in a complaint about it. What did everybody think about that particular moment and how it was treated?
I actually want to play that game. And I think that game should be out there, actually, because of the themes in it. And I feel like that student should get over themselves. I think they were just trying to raise an issue for the sake of it.
What did I think?
I think it should come with a disclaimer that it might be triggering, though, for anyone who's like, you know.
It's based on so that is based on a game. Because when I read it, I was like, oh, I know what she's based this on. Tickets, Please. I think it's based on Tickets, Please.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, so Cam, you know what I'm talking about, which is where you are.
Papers, Please.
Papers,
Please.
That's the one.
Sorry,
yeah,
Papers, Please. Thank you. Yeah. And when I read the game, I was like, I know this game. I know where this is pulling from. And sure enough, it was pulled from Papers, Please. But that, like, unfortunately, that was also one of the most interesting parts of this book, was right at that point, because that's interesting.
That was
gaming.
my most interesting part.
Yeah, and it's like, this is really cool. Do you mean, what did we think about someone making a complaint, or what did we think about the way the university and it was handled? I think the fact that Dove was the tutor, the teacher, made it go away, which is not great, but I think that the MIT probably is like, we have a star person here, and if they want this to go away, they can. And like, if it been that was kind of my what do you call it, my oh God, I can't think of the word, my, you know, I'm kind of cynical view my cynical view.
I
It was a
realized
bit
too.
sad that they used the only other woman in the class
Yeah.
as the one who made the complaint. That was like,
And is
did it
that,
have to be her?
is that what your thought was? Was that what your thought was around that, Mel? What we thought about?
No,
that?
my thoughts comes from the education perspective, which would be that it should have been at least interrogated more than it was, obviously. I don't disagree with Lisa's assessment where it is a good option, a good game, and that it should exist. However, the lack of questioning around it, I think, was the problem. Like the fact that it was just dismissed immediately. There was no questions asked. Obviously, that's a sign of the time as well. It's not necessarily, that's my reflections as me now rather than the people then.
A thing of perspective rather than like maybe it was interrogated a bit more closely and we just didn't get that because Sadie didn't get that.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
unlikely, but
It certainly
Is
didn't
Papers,
feel
Please-
likely.
Does Papers, Please have that hidden backstory to it as well? Does it, like in Solution? Okay.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just looked
So
up and
you
saw some
don't know
pictures and I
what
was
you're
like,
doing. You don't know what you're doing, and then it's a little bit more nuanced in that it's you don't find out at the end. It actually starts to let you know what's going. You start to get more clues. So it's a little bit more narrative driven. I've never played it, but I've watched some playthrough, like watched people playing it. Yeah, I mean that's came out. I think it was a 2015 game.
yeah, it was
2012.
relatively recently.
Yeah. So and people are more up for being challenged, I think, in this century than they were in last century, to be like, this game's going to make me think.
Now that's actually something that is different though, because when you're saying like that it comes up in the game, what's like you get to see it, that I actually think is reflective of games today versus games then, because back then what Sam did with going through and playing the game in all of the different ways, that's what people used to do with games. Like they would go back and play them again and do them in different ways. And that, I mean, people still do it today, but like not to the same degree. And so I actually thought that was one of the things that was particularly good about the way that Sadie had designed the game, is that it gave you that ability to have that aha moment and then go, well, now
Replay value.
when I play it, the replayability is a really big part of the why it's a good game, apart from obviously the educational element.
Well, and that's what they wanted to do on both sides, is
Yeah.
replayability
I think
from both
a lot of the
perspectives,
games from when I was younger were more designed for replayability, or you just played them more. You didn't have this plethora of games coming out that had a particular storyline. Storylines front to back, you played it once wasn't very common when I was younger, whereas now they are, because you've got a different type of development. But yeah, most games were replayable, or they were arcade games, or there were things that you could play over and over again.
And that's what's so clever about
they were engaging to be able to replay it. They weren't just going to be a story that was the same thing if you played it again.
And that was what's so clever about the way Zevin designed her version of Papers, Please as Solution, because you're aiming for this high score, which is very much of its time. Like, I want to get a perfect score, I want to get a perfect run, that type of thing. But then it's this other part to it, and that's the unusual, like, oh, there's a duality. There's the theme again to this game, which is unusual. But like you said, people would have been playing it to get the high score, get the perfect thing, and then to find out they've been duped. I mean, I wouldn't have been upset. I'd be like, whoa, I need to play that again and play it from it. Like, that would have been my reaction. I need to just play the whole thing again. That would have been like kind of thing, So, but yeah, you're right. Like the other female in the class, and I think she was already being, and part of it is also, women being shit to other women back then. But it was obvious that Dove was paying her attention, and it's.
Yeah, but to be fair, it started even before that like the antagonism between them started even before Dove became an element between the two of them. It was
pretty much day one.
Immediate. It was immediate. So
it reminds me of a conversation I once had with my mother, who was a woman who grew up, who was going into adulthood in the 1960s and 70s, which was a really shit time to be a woman unless you were happy to be a housewife, nurse, or teacher. And I was saying to her that I I'd had some negative experiences of working under women who were managers who were her age. And I said, I don't think I ever want to work under a woman who's, you know, your age, Mum, because they're real bitches. And Mum said, and they had to be. And then she educated me about just how hard it was. And so I'm sort of, when the other female, I've forgotten her name, the other female character was like trying to completely sever herself because she's trying to build her career and doesn't want any, and already knows how hard it is in this sadly still male dominated area. I'm like, oh yeah, it's that. It's
that competition
thing still going on.
Yeah. I do think though, as someone, unfortunately, I find that a little bit of a trope that the other woman is competition. I find that a bit tropey because as someone who was at university, I did film school. We girls, we stuck together. We actually really found one another and I'm still friends with lots of my girlfriends from those days. Not the guys. You know, so
but there was a lot of that, right, where females, especially I think in the 80s and early 90s, saw that the way to survive was to get along with the guys and to be one of the guys rather than to be join the girls.
Oh, I'm not saying that at all, but it's also something I see in this particular story. Like Sadie doesn't have close female friendships.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like,
I can remember.
Are there like many other women? Because I'm at 40% and I haven't seen a whole lot.
No, there's her grandmother and her sister, and that's about the only ones I can really remember. Oh, there's Hannah, actually, the Marxist girlfriend for the first half. Zoe Hannah. They become and that actually is really nice because I think it opens Sadie up to really enjoying California. And again, unfortunately, maybe drives, because what happens in that part is that Sam isn't really able to, his recovery is not good, but he doesn't tell anybody because of course he doesn't.
I mean, he didn't tell anyone there was a problem in the first place. Like,
no. So his recovery he has a lot of phantom pain. And because his recovery doesn't go well, he doesn't really hang out with Zoe, Marks, and Sadie, and so it basically all just starts deteriorating in that kind of respect. But that's also where Marks and Sadie form a really solid friendship, which then later develops into a relationship. So you can see why they, go from there. But yeah.
So anyway. It's not like. So what does that relationship end up being like between Sadie and Zoe then? Like, does it end up being conflicted?
No, not at all. Marks and Zoe break up and then Zoe moves to Italy. So that's she's kind of, I mean, there's a little bit of flirting, a bit too much ecstasy one night,
That's okay. I was just wondering whether it replicates the like antagonistic women sort of angle, but it doesn't seem
not at all.
So that's a relief.
No, and I think it's possibly because Zoe is, she's a musician, she's very creative, and she's also in a completely different world to them. Like she actually writes all the music for their games. So she's really in competition. She's there to support them, and they're there to support her to do their best work, which is really nice. So no, it does end up really nice. And also, she's from LA. Zoe's not. Zoe's excited about the city, so it infects her with enthusiasm and excitement, and she's wanting to enjoy it. Whereas poor Sam's suffering, but they don't know he's suffering. So yeah, it's all a bit much. But yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are we good to wrap up?
Yeah. So I think that's us. Sounds like it's sort of a ho-hum time. Apologies to everyone who loved this book. And if you loved it, that is all good. You love what you love. We're not here to yuck on your yums. But if you want other good books, we have heaps of recommendations. Just check back through our YouTube channel. There's some real zingers in there. So if you like this, wait till you read some of the others. So yeah, goodbye and good luck.
And our next book hangout will be reading Magic, Steep and Poison by Judy Lim, I believe. Bye.
Oh, okay.
Oh, look,
Bye.
physical book. Woo!